Hi, everyone. This is Julie Harris Walker, host of the Catch a Break podcast. As we're rolling out season 2 of Catch a Break, we want to note that all of it was recorded before COVID-19 happened, production shut down, and everything changed. And it brings up a lot of questions like, where do we go from here? Well, we're going to address all the questions being brought up as this industry figures out how to go back to work in a world where everything is different. We're doing a series of live podcast recordings with video starting May 28th and running every Thursday for 4 weeks at 1 p.m. Pacific time. You can join us. Go to catchabreakpodcast.com and click on the live COVID-19 speaker series page, and we will send you the links to join us for those very timely conversations. And now back to season 2 of Catch a Break. Hello, and welcome to the Catch a Break podcast, the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating the entertainment industry. Season 2 of Catch a Break is brought to you by Cachet, the production credit card. Manage your cards and spend in real time and get cash back on every dollar you spend on your show with Cachet. I'm Julie Harris Walker, and today on the podcast, we continue our discussion on buying and selling. This time we'll be joined by Sherryl Clark and Peter van Steemburg. Sherryl Clark is the president of production of the H Collective. Formerly the head of film at Bad Robot, Sherryl has produced and overseen films like Cloverfield, Star Trek, Morning Glory, and Super 8. Her recent credits include fantasy thriller Wish Upon, drama Fathers and Daughters starring Russell Crowe, and she recently completed the drama Blackbird starring Kate Winslet and Susan Sarandon. Peter van Steemburg is the vice president of acquisitions and production at the Universal Pictures Content Group, where he was responsible for acquiring independently produced features for North America. He spent 8 years working in the acquisitions department of Magnolia Pictures and Magnet Releasing, where he was responsible for negotiating the U.S. rights for feature films such as The Hunter, Beyond the Black Rainbow, Nymphomaniac, just to name a few. And in 2015, Peter joined ICM Partners in the role of agent in the International Independent Department, where he arranged financing and or distribution for such titles as I Am Not Your Negro, The Battle of Lefty Brown, and Gemini. Okay, so welcome to Catch a Break. Today we're talking about buying and selling and everything that's required and everything that goes on. And today we have Sherryl Clark and Peter van Steemburg with us to talk about this, and also Jessica Malanofi, one of the founders of Catch a Break. So I'm going to ask you guys, what was your very first job in the business and how did you get it? And I'm going to start with Sherryl.
My very first job was being an assistant to the head of production at Walt Disney TV Animation. And I was waiting tables, and I'd graduated from college, and another waitress had gotten a job over there, and she said, don't you want to make movies didn't you go to film school? And I was like, yes, please get me out of waiting tables. And she helped me get the job, and that was my toe dipping in. It was my very first job.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Peter, how about you?
I did a series of little small productions here and there in New York and was doing some gallery work, just like interviewing up a storm. I interviewed at maybe like 30 places in TV and film, just knew I really wanted to do entertainment. And then in 2004, I had a friend from high school who was working at Miramax at the time, and it was sort of a bridge year before Harvey and Bob ended up going to start the Weinstein Co. So I started in international distribution and operations on just a desk, and worked my way from there.
Let's start at the beginning. What does it mean to be a buyer or a seller, Sherryl?
Well, I have been on both sides. I started at Disney in various jobs, and then I quickly decided I didn't really want to be a buyer. I wanted to be a seller because I feel like I'm a more entrepreneurial person. So I ended up working for a producer, and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so you could be selling shoes, you could be selling a script, you could be selling anything. It really is just a passion for what you're doing and how to put those pieces together. And hopefully there's a marketplace for it.
Yeah, I want to dig into all of those pieces. And Peter, can you talk about maybe the buying side of it?
Yeah, so from Miramax, I went over to Cinetic Media, and I was working mostly in the financing side, another kind of junior position. But we were traveling to the festivals and speaking to a lot of distributors, and it really was at that point where it clicked for me. I knew enough about sort of distribution to be interested, but I mean, frankly, it seemed like all the people I wanted to know, and that the job that I found the most kind of curatorial and interesting was on the acquisition side. So, for me, I think that it's kind of a perfect mix for someone that has like a creative instinct, but is maybe not kind of a writer or developer or a full-time producer. It's someone I think that has kind of a curatorial eye, and a lot of the distributors that I worked for have that bridge between the business and the creative.
That's so interesting. Just if you're starting out and you're thinking, I'm a creative person and I can do this, I think there's got to be a moment of reckoning between, okay, maybe I'm not a creator, but I know good stuff when I see it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I can only speak from personal experience. For me, I think a lot of people fall into it because there's limited jobs in both buying and selling, right? I think it's like a very specific part of the industry, and that's part of the reason that I really love it, and I'm sure it's the same for you. It's a small community of people that know each other, and a lot of people sort of fall into it. There's an opportunity and you jump, because it's not like you can go to school to become an acquisitions executive or a sales executive per se, right?
Right.
For me, I learned early on, like in school, I studied art history, and it was all sort of with an idea that I was going to go into museum work and kind of curatorial. And what ended up happening was I bridged that together with film, and it was sort of a nice combination. So I can't speak for everybody.
I'm sure everyone has a different path to get into it. So Jessica, you do a lot of selling.
Yes.
Let's talk about what you put together before you go out to pitch.
Well, I'm curious to hear both of your perspectives on this too. I think that's always kind of the debate, is how much do you package? So when I was at Blumhouse, which was kind of like halfway between a buyer and a seller, because we were technically a seller, but also, we had such a great relationship with Universal that we could kind of dictate which projects we were taking on. So, we would really request, when we were getting submitted projects from agents and managers and writers and directors, we really preferred things that were less packaged. Like just a script was great, because certain directors that would work for other companies weren't necessarily within the Blumhouse model, which was looking for directors that were, already established, had already shot a couple of movies, knew their way around a film set, just because the shoots were so quick, and we really needed somebody who kind of knew the business already.
But also within a certain budget.
Exactly, who knew how that independent production process worked. So I think it was a very different way of packaging projects we went into Universal than most places. I think a lot of places prefer that you have a couple pieces of talent, especially if you're going the financing route, you have a couple pieces, maybe an actor or a director already attached.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm putting together a package right now, and I have the company I'm running now has financing. So we are a buyer and a seller. But then there are certain projects where you think, okay, we're going to go into this one at 50% and we're going to look for the other half. So not only are you're passionate enough to put in a certain amount of money, but you're also smart enough from a business standpoint that you don't want to take all the risk. Mm-hmm. So I was literally just on the phone on the way here talking to the head of another financier about a specific project, and I said, well, we have the budget, we have a script, we have the director, we have the creature designer, I have my VFX producer, I have 6 bids from various VFX companies, because it's obviously a very VFX intensive movie, and he was like, that's amazing. You've done so much work. I would just need the script. And I was like, oh, as I'm pitching my heart out on the way over here, he's like, you could just send me the script. I'll read it this weekend. And I'm thinking, I have this whole presentation.
Right.
A lot of people don't need it.
You have the model of the creature already made.
I do. I mean, it's baking right now, but I do. And some 3D images, but it's cool. And that's the star of the movie. The creature in this case, besides the female star. But it is so important that you get that right, because a bad creature
could kill it.
I think it's
so
also
cheesy.
When you're selling something, it's also about how much creative control you want to preserve. And I think the more that you package something in advance of bringing in other cooks to the kitchen, the more you can advance that vision and kind of streamline it a little bit and streamline the process sometimes. Sometimes you do all this work and then somebody comes in that's a partner that throws out everything that you've been building. So, that's kind of the risk too. But it does help you, I think, if you've pushed the project forward to a certain degree before you have more partners.
I mean, that is a big risk. It is anytime you ask for other money, they have a say.
Sure.
I mean, people are putting big, large amounts of money into something. They have a say. And so, like you, and we're also controlling in type A, that you want to put the pieces in the most attractive way possible together, that you feel like you can sell that thing to the person who's like, yes, I would like to put my money into that thing, not I'd like to take that thing and dismantle it.
Right.
So there is that tightrope.
So how important is it to have a script?
A script is usually key, at least in the experiences I have. I think, look, every project's totally different. But I think, to your point, it's a really careful balancing act on the packaging side. I've seen plenty of situations, especially at the agency side, where the instinct is to put everything in piece, to make sure that the script is final draft, full actors, full casting crew, and then you take it out. And then sometimes people are just basically saying yes or no based on that. So there's nothing you can sort of trade or necessarily maneuver around. You can't move the chess pieces as much. So there can be a danger to sort of packaging something a little too much. On the script side, I think it depends on where you're at, right? If you're working on the studio side and you're kind of in development world, and you're looking at a package or a project that might just be a big actor that wants to work on a book, and you're going to kind of be developing that together with the representatives. That's a different scenario. I think in terms of really pure kind of independent distribution, you're often going to be working with a script if it's not completed is near completion, at least in the projects that I've worked on.
So those old stories where we went in the room, we said 2 sentences, we sold it for $500,000. Is that happening anymore, ever?
Hardly. Although I did buy something recently from Derek Kolstad, who created John Wick, and we had been wanting to work together for a long time, and he has a pretty proven track record in a certain kind of movie making, and we had a half-baked idea and he had half of an idea, and those 2 ideas together became a full idea, and we just bought it. We're like, let's just do that. We have the ability to do it. We're going to pay you to write it. And now we're going to find partners. But he couldn't be hotter given that John Wick 3 just did so much business.
Right.
So now I have a Derek Kolstad franchise that can be shot for $25 million, the first movie. It's a global kind of movie. And I feel pretty satisfied that we took that leap and bought the 2 lines.
So that seems like a slam dunk. But if he was nobody walking in your room with an idea,
the answer would be no.
Right.
But I think you take a look at all the elements on the board too, what genre you're working on, the directors, the producers, where the cast can be. I mean, it's far different raising financing for $1 million first-time feature drama than it is raising, $5 million for, a horror film with proven track record director. So and you take a look at where your strengths are and where you can lean, and that becomes your pitch.
Another thing to consider when you're talking about how packaged you want something is just about the investment you want from your buyer. So a big part of my job at Universal, because we were making these low budget movies where they really didn't have that much skin in the game at, $2.5 million, was to get them really invested. And a lot of time that meant bringing in a director that they were super excited about, or a piece of talent they're really excited about. And whatever you can do, that might mean, we would talk about in the Blumhouse model, the directors all had final cut. But did you really want to say no to the studio notes if that would get them more invested in your project? No, of course not. You want them to love it. You want them to champion it and think of it as their own, piece of material as well. So I think that's another thing to consider.
Okay, let's go to the very beginning of the process. Once you have your piece that you've developed, how do you get in the room, and what do you do once you get in there?
Well, that is about time and relationships and reputation. It truly is. Yes, you can come to town with money and get in any room you want, for sure. Everyone wants a new source of financing, a new person, a fresh perspective. But to really get in those rooms and be taken seriously, it's time and years put in. It's not screwing people over. It's trying to really be mindful of how you conduct yourself with the talent, with the town, with the agents, with everybody. And there is no magic potion to that idea. It really is relationships and relationship building.
It's a big question, and I completely agree. I think sometimes it can be viewed as if there are gatekeepers that's sort of preventing people from in, but I actually try to view it from the other side, in that you're really looking for advocates. Sometimes that's a festival programmer, that can be a representative or a producer, but it's exactly that. It's the time and relationships are the only way to get into a door.
Do you have a thought on it?
I agree.
But the funny thing is with that, even if you've known people for 20 years and you've spoken to them, you're not going to speak to everyone regularly. There are going to be many year gaps in between. And I still get sweaty palms sometimes calling certain people where you're like, I haven't talked to this person in so long. And they're like, Sherryl, how are you? And I'm like, oh, it's so silly to get nervous about this. What is the worst that can happen? They say no.
Right.
That's the absolute worst thing that can happen to you, is just a no. So if you really, I always tell younger execs coming up, worst thing is no. best thing is you get in the meeting, you get to sell your thing. So if you just know, they're not going to come hurt you, they're not going to yell at you. They're just going to say, no, I'm not interested. So, but it's still nerve-wracking.
We can all survive that.
Yes, we can all survive a no, but it is still somewhat nerve-wracking when you're calling certain people, that, especially if you're not regularly in contact with them.
Sure.
I think one of the benefits of sales, though, is it's so part of that job is having to maintain those relationships and having to really reach out. One of the things I miss about that side of the business is that there was a real motivation to get to know other people's businesses too, and to kind of check in a little more regularly and get a nice view of the industry.
We have a question from a listener. Can we pose it to you guys?
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm an award-winning writer, no agent. I've been in Hollywood land for 15 years, 12 projects on the finish line, but constantly run into no unsolicited material. Can you see my air quotes, listeners? My ex-agent took me down a devastating route, hence I prefer to be without one. Some production companies are open to release form submissions, but the guard dogs in most refuse to move beyond their own words, no unsolicited material. Please advise.
Well, in some ways, I think she's maybe taking the wrong route, because if your email, if your plan is to email cold anyway, then your script's automatically going to go to the bottom of a list, even places that will accept unsolicited. In my experience, it's not total bullshit, but people can read really whatever they want. I don't see a lot of legal ramifications or obstacles for people to actually share their work, but I do think it is important to have some level of advocacy. It doesn't need to be an agent or a manager, but it needs to be someone that can actually kind of speak for you in certain circumstances, especially if you're pushing people cold. I think that's important.
Unsolicited, just to be clear, from my perspective as well. If you don't have an agent, that's fine. But if a fellow producer calls me and says, "Hey, Sherryl, oh my God, we're not doing a monster movie right now, but I know you love those movies. Totally. I just read a great one. They don't have an agent." I'll read anything like that. But what I won't do is someone filling my inbox with just random emails. I've never heard of you. I don't know you. You don't know anyone I know. It becomes dicey. And I've had some really challenging situations over the years with people, because I'm a very open person and I'm like, hi, and stalkers. Really dangerous people too. And you just have to go, you know what, there has to be a policy in place. So if you know someone who knows someone who knows me, I'll read it.
It's also like a marriage that you're entering into here. When you're picking a writer that you're working with, you're going to spend a long time with them, working very, very closely. And somewhat, there are times when in the process things might become contentious. And like Sherryl was saying, you have to be able to trust that we're all in this together. We're all motivated in the same direction, and that we're all like-minded. And I think that's definitely a key. And I think, to Peter's point, I think that there are different badges of approval that you can get that aren't representation. So that could be the listener mentioned screenwriting competitions. If you're a finalist for the Nichols Awards, definitely
everyone's going to read your script.
Yeah. That's something.
And I think the other,
if you get in the Sundance Lab, right?
Totally.
If there's and it's not to be unkind. I think it can feel, and my heart goes out to people that are writers and they're busting their ass and they're trying to take the right route. But it is also just a matter of logistics and time management, right?
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not going to read your script because I might not like you or that I'm not open to new ideas. It's that, we've done a breakdown, in terms of I probably read a script a day, right? And that's just the stuff that I need to read, and not even the stuff that I maybe even want to read, on top of the completed films. And as a group, we screen well over 2,000 films a year, or at least consider completed films. So it's just you have to find a way to make the time for it. And so you're going to prioritize those people that are advocates that you believe in, producers you believe in, and also people you want to work with. I'm going out to look for people that I would be excited to work for, or work with that maybe don't know about our group.
And then is there also some legal risk to it?
Yes.
And what is that?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is you could be developing something very similar. Someone sends you an unsolicited script, you pass and say, I'm developing something similar, and then they sue you and say you stole their idea.
Sure.
It is a complicated situation, but if you're new and you really don't know the landscape, you might believe I stole your idea because you don't know how it works, and you don't know I have 10 disaster movies in development and yours happens to be that, and you think, oh, that looks so familiar. Of course it does, because a lot of things are familiar. So that is a huge, huge risk for any production company. You're taking something in and you're like, oh, and you pass reasonably. Listen, I have a thing, here's my thing. And it won't be a win, like, do I win or lose the lawsuit? It's just the time and money that would go into fighting that. And so I'd rather not have the aggravation, the legal aggravation of something like that, especially someone coming in with no experience and no representation to explain, there's 20 of those. I mean, there's 3 or 4 projects right now entitled The Beast in town.
I mean, there always is, right?
Yeah, the ideas just get into the ether a little bit. And I mean, that's why you have trends. I mean, it makes sense.
Right. I remember the year where there were 3 Alexander the Greats that were produced.
It happens fairly
and 2
often.
volcano movies that were produced. And
there were 2 Fire Festival documentaries.
There were 2 Capote films, remember? I mean, like, these things just happen right at the same time. It's like...
Yeah.
I think the other thing to take into account is who you're trying to get to read your material. So if you're coming to Sherryl or Peter, like, you really do have those time constraint issues. If you're going to an assistant who just wants to find that one young writer that they can partner with and they can develop and bring in, or a young manager who, or a young assistant in a management company who wants to hip pocket somebody and develop that piece of talent, you're going to have a lot more success with those hungry types than you are with people who just already have their slate full at the top.
Junior representatives, managers, and agents are can be the unsung heroes in the industry.
For
absolutely.
Sure. And they can be advocates.
I'll absolutely take those calls too, because they have their advocates, right? I mean, they're usually like a major agency or management company, and you want to support those careers too.
Yeah, and back in the day when I was at Copelson, we got a script in from, I think it was Dave Wirtschafter's assistant, called Killing on Carnival Row. And Ryan Engel and I read it. Ryan Engel's now a fancy writer, but he was like my CE or story editor at the time, or maybe even my assistant. We read it. We loved it. Arnold was like, this is the coolest thing. It's like Seven, but in a steampunk. We got Guillermo del Toro. We got New Line. We got $90 million to make it. And then we didn't end up making it. It fell apart. It is now going to be a miniseries. But Travis Beecham, the writer, was in film school when I got that. He was still in film school in North Carolina. So we flew him out, bought his script. He then signed with, I think, Cliff Roberts at the time. I mean, it was like crazy. But
he won the lottery.
Because an assistant read it, probably sent it to Ryan because she was friends with Ryan. Ryan's like, you've got to read this. We ended up buying it. It was so cool, and the world was so interesting, and he has such a unique voice that is like one of those rare things where, to your point, that industrious assistant was like, this is a very talented person. Who cares if he's in film school? But he just posted something on Facebook. He's like, Killing on Carnival Row. And I was like, I am so happy to have been a very small part of this, bringing you to Hollywood. But that is the kind of thing I used to do a lot more of that.
And then how quickly did that assistant move up?
I don't know what happened, but they ended up getting the client. So, and everybody wanted Travis at the time. It was like a feeding frenzy.
It's a similar thing that happened with Paranormal Activity. It was an assistant who went to, I think it was Fantastic Fest, and saw a screening and went back to CAA and said to Martin Spencer, you've got to check this movie out, and brought a screener, harassed Oren, got a screener, brought it back to CAA. Again, assistant who, sounded the alarm.
Most people passed on that film. It wasn't even released,
Everyone
I think, 2 years after, right? I mean, or some amount of time.
We were looking at it at DreamWorks originally as a sample.
And part of it was the DreamWorks Paramount merger, and it sat on a shelf, and then Adam Goodman was like, oh, I'm going to remake this, and then I think it was it Steven Spielberg who's like, you should just release it, it's good.
Well, tested it, right? There was I think Paramount tested it and was like, oh, wow, now I get it.
Jason had this great idea. He built into the contract. He sold it to DreamWorks as a remake, and said, but we have to test it and everybody has to be there. So Stacy was there and Adam was there and all the assistants were there and screened it. And it screened amazingly well, the same way that the response was in all of the theatrical screenings when the movie opened. And they said, oh my God, we have to actually release this. And Jeanette Volturno, who's another one of the founders of Catch a Break, she was involved in reshooting a little bit of the ending and going off and playing, and she can tell the full story much better than I can. But it all started with that assistant, and then, assistant screenings at DreamWorks, who, we all really loved seeing the movie. And from there, it got caught up in the Paramount divorce and all of that. And so it kind of got tabled. And there's a longer story there about how the, Jason and the amazing team of marketers at Paramount came up with the Demand It campaign and, all of that. But that was really a rough road to get that movie released,
Which kind of goes to show you, it's never personal.
Never.
It so hardly ever has anything to do with you.
It's really hard to get people's attention.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really hard to get things made, and you have to, like Sheryl's saying, how long has it taken for Carnival Row to finally find a home? There's so many projects like that have been around for 10 years that just finally, they had that moment.
But there's something about a good project, and I always feel this as a producer. I knew Carnival Row somehow would find a way. It has found a way. And it's funny, the last time I'd seen Guillermo, this was before he did Shape of Water, when I was still at Bad Robot, and he's like, are you still working with that genius Travis Beacham? And I said, so funny, we are. And he goes, I love that script. I still can't stop thinking of that script. And I was like, this movie's going to get made somehow.
How many years between?
Yeah.
So it was 2004 or 5 when Travis was in school. I can't remember what, but because I left the company at the end of 2006. So it was probably 2005 when we bought it. And then it's just been made into a limited series this year.
Okay, so hang in there.
Sometimes,
it can take some time.
Honestly, but good is good. Good never goes out. Good is good. It doesn't matter what genre it is. A good thriller is a good thriller. A good action movie is good. It will somehow find a way. I really believe that. A good piece of writing, and the Kopelsons really, that was their thing. It's all about the script.
Is there ever a time where the script is okay, but the pitch puts it over the line?
Maybe back in the old days. Not now. I think it has to be on the page.
I think there can sometimes be you can maybe misunderstand a script until you sort of see someone's work. I've definitely seen scenarios where I've been maybe a little soft on a script. I remember I was really soft on sort of Take Shelter when I first read it at Sonic, and then I saw the work and I realized that it had not been how I envisioned it. But it's really rare to not see quality on the script and how
Well, here's an embarrassing story about me. So I'm a young exec, and someone sends me Being John Malkovich, and I'm like, what the? I don't get this. I do not get this script. I didn't get it. I didn't understand the tone. And then I see the movie, and I loved the movie, worshiping. And I thought, wow, I really didn't know how to read that script then. It didn't jump off the page and live in my head in the way some scripts do. And I just did not get it until I saw the movie. And then I was like, this movie is mind-blowing. And I'm like, I remember saying to the other exec, what if you don't get John Malkovich? I was being so literal and so, stupid. And it's so funny. That one will always live in my head as that story of I really didn't see the greatness on the page. And that's why there's so many people doing it, and everyone has different taste, and people have different approaches, and that was the one. I just didn't get it.
One thing I really respect, though, especially when reading scripts or talking about projects, is a real level of decisiveness, because I think when you're in acquisitions or development, it's to say no, definitively no to something is great. That's maybe 10%. And to say definitively yes to something is maybe even smaller. It's 5%. But there's a whole lot of middle of well, it's a good producer, it's a good idea, the script's not quite there. That's most projects, is it's not quite definitive. So you really start to respect both the producers and the executives that can really make a decision and can really push something forward. Because a lot of great scripts too might sort of be in the middle for somebody and are just not elevated.
We had exactly that at DreamWorks on Juno, actually, kind of similar story where, I was overseeing a bunch of the readers at the time, working with Andrea, and all the readers passed on Juno. And it became this huge thing in the weekend read meeting of oh my God, guys, this is going to sell. It's one of the voices of this generation. How are we not, flagging this as something for everyone to read? And what it came down to was the readers, we adjusted the way that they rated and commented on scripts after this in a big way, because they all said, well, this isn't really a DreamWorks movie. Yeah. And they were right, but it was still something where it was an incredible voice of, Diablo Cody, and everybody should have taken note, but it really wasn't a DreamWorks movie. So I think that's a good thing for us to talk about too, is how do you, as a seller, build the list of the right people to send your script to, because if I'm doing a horror movie, I'm not going to send it
to Disney.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you do that research and compile who do I approach for which project?
And I think sometimes that's a bit to do with your own personal taste, right? So if I'm more of a thriller, horror, creature, weirdly, I also like prestige dramas. If I have this array of things that I really love, but I'm not necessarily a comedy person, and I'm not a family film person. So I can just take those out of my sandbox, and I look at what I like. Those are the people, then who does that. You know who does that. Those like-minded people out there. I know Disney's off the table for most of my material. Warner Brothers, unless I had a fancy director and a major movie star, they're probably off the table. So you kind of like hone in on who is on the table and focus on those relationships and staying current with those people and letting them know what you're doing. And when you have something good, only going to them with something that you feel is really quality, because there's nothing worse than overstaying your welcome on on anyone's phone sheet or sending too much material where they're like, oh, because then the really good one, it's not going to get read.
And that's the danger too when you're when you're raising truly independent financing. If it's like you're using a lot of equity, you're playing to sometimes people's personal tastes, but you almost never know. Hereditary, which I saw come together over at ICM, had been kind of held up at the wrong production company for a while and went way faster than anybody believed. And we got a lot of interest from people that had never made horror before. But we didn't expect that, right? So we had to quickly sort of expand that list and sort of catch up to it. So, there's definitely occasions on the other side too, where you kind of cut people off the list. You're like, okay, we're just going to focus on the horror people. It's hard to know what you have sometimes, even if you've done it a lot.
And sometimes you think you have the crown jewel of something and everyone just passes. So you can still love it, but the marketplace has spoken to some degree.
Painful.
And sometimes you can, like many movies, good is good. You can set it down for a second. 6 months later, you can sort of put some creative energy and say, what was the reason why that was a pass? Like, I still love this idea. And every now and then someone will call me, are you still working on such and such a script? And I'm like, it's sort of sitting on a shelf for a minute. I'm letting it like cool off because I don't exactly know how to put those pieces together. And then, an agent will say, well, what about so-and-so for this? And I was like, oh, that is an interesting approach to this piece of material. So sometimes you need to walk away for a minute in order to refresh it, because you can just bang your head against the wall. And once people have said no, you just have to take no for a minute.
Have there been cases where everyone says no and then 10, 15 years later, everybody's ready for it?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good is good. Just to your point. Yeah.
Seven is a perfect example of that. Arnold got it in Turnaround. Jeremiah Chechik was attached to direct that movie. That would have been a different movie. So, he got it in Turnaround, and then Fincher was in movie jail and from Alien 3, and he'd done a lot of cool music videos, and Arnold just believed that he was the right guy. And they made a masterpiece. So it's just that, and that was several years in the making. But Andy Kevin Walker was a very interesting voice as a screenwriter. And I remember when the script came out originally, it was like, whoa, that guy can write. So yes, of course, things can, the audience or the buyer or the financier may not be ready for something. Or technology may not have caught up.
Right. But its time will come.
Can you explain Turnaround for our listeners?
Yes. So sometimes as a producer, you set up a project, and there are many, many famous examples of this, Pretty Woman and Home Alone and Seven and many others, where a project was initially set up with Studio A. Studio A may have a change in regime, or they just decided they don't want to make that kind of movie anymore. So the producers are screaming, you have to make my movie or give it back to me. And the give it back to me process is called turnaround. And so the producer then has a period of time to go set the movie up elsewhere with independent financing or another studio, and then that person pays the original studio back for their time and money, and then they get to go make their movie. So that's the basic turnaround.
Peter, can you talk about how you go about finding new talent or finding new property, up and comers?
Absolutely, that's the fun part of the job. So for me, I've found that dealing with producers has been kind of the most meaningful way to do that, and festival programmers. I trust the agencies and the managers too, but their agenda is always slightly different, right? I mean, they really try to get work for their clients, and sometimes it might not necessarily be a project or a person that's right for us. There's something about producers that are sort of like really putting their money where their mouth is. So if there's like a first-time feature director, I don't really know their work well, but it's a really tested producer who's like, I'm about to dedicate 2 years of my life to this person. I really believe in that. That's really meaningful. You know, they're not having a lot of clients. They might have a lot of projects. They're really tying their life to somebody. So I always think about that. And festival programmers too, especially out of the big ones, you know, they can't always give you a tip necessarily, but in terms of what they program and how they program, I found those to be the most meaningful relationships in terms of scouting new talent. Because there's also a lot of people that like don't get into Sundance, but you might talk to, you know, one of the shorts programmers over there and they might say, this didn't get in, but this is the one I wanted to play. Right. Or, you know, people, they're paid to be supporters in the film industry too. Labs, I always take a look at what's getting into kind of the major kind of festival labs or institute labs. Short films, I love short films and proof of concept. I think it's still like a really meaningful part of the industry, and I always like recommend that for kind of filmmakers trying to make their way. Although there's different ways to sort of get exposure to your short film. I watch a lot of short films.
I think there are also certain people who are known as kind of tastemakers, whether they're representatives or, you know, assistants, or there are certain people. It's a great way if you're starting out in your career to kind of differentiate yourself, is to be that go-to source for knowing every great. There's one guy that I call, if I want a Spanish genre director, you know, he's the guy. Or, you know, like they're these people that just kind of develop this very specific sensibility that you can always call on.
Because you can't possibly know everything and everyone.
No. You just rely on those good people.
And when you get into a new space or a space you haven't been in a minute, if you're looking for, you know, a female voice, you can do a character pass on a script, for example. The first thing I do is call up all my friends and say, hey, what have you read recently that has the same kind of flavor? So I think on the director and the writer side, it's, you know, it's all of us kind of sharing great voices.
Now, is there a difference in how you go to sell if you're trying to raise independent financing versus you're going to go sell to a studio or a major production company?
A difference in terms of how it's presented, do you mean? Yes and no. They come together so differently. In my experience, on the financing, the independent financing side you're generally looking at lower budgets too. So your list is going to be far wider, right? There's fewer options on the studio side. I mean, the one benefit of working in sort of the studio development world and working on higher budgets is that there really is a limited group of people you can go to. Yes, there are financiers that will do the multi-million dollar films, kind of the tens of millions, but for the most part, it's a smaller list, so you can kind of know better whether you're going to be taking a bet on a project. Although I think you can speak to that a little better.
Well,
but independently, it's just like there's hundreds of independent financiers and ways that films can come together, and you're going to probably cater your pitch to those individual people. How you speak to a debt financier is maybe different than how you're going to speak to an equity financier. Is different than how you're going to speak to A24 or Neon, right? So. When I'm working with filmmakers, I make sure that they're kind of curating their pitch to the place that we're going to, and we can get into that too.
Yeah, and it depends on the budget. Yeah. You know, like, and studios now have declared pretty definitively that they're really just looking mostly for IP. So if you don't have a big piece of IP or something that you think could be the Fast and the Furious, or could be one of those John Wick style, where it can be a little bit smaller to start with, but it has to feel global. It has to feel like it has real reach and can make enough noise to open theatrically on a busy weekend. And if you don't think that, then the list is very specific on the sort of $20 million and under movies. So you just get to know that by experience. I think
another thing is just how makeable production-wise your project is. And I think knowing who you're partnering with, if you're going to a financier that doesn't really get their hands dirty in production, you need to be able to have either yourself or another partner who's going to really be able to speak to that production ability. Yeah. You know, and that know-how, and that comes with, you know, bringing perhaps a budget or, you know, a team that you know is going to be able to put the project together, versus if you're going to somebody who actually has the track record for producing the movies themselves, it's a little bit different in terms of how you present it.
And I like to do that where specifically on a very difficult production, and I'm doing that right now on something where you build it a certain way. You read that script and people are like, how are you going to do that? And I'm like, I know I can. So I'm going to call this person and this person and this person, and we're going to put together a plan So when I go to those people, they're like, whoa, that is makeable at that number.
Right.
I wouldn't have imagined that on the page.
You've solved the problem.
So producing is solving problems.
Yeah.
That really is all it is. It's putting out fires and solving problems. And if you're not
figuring out puzzles.
Yeah, and if you're not a multitasking problem solver, producing is not for you. So that really, and I love the puzzle of that. That's one of my favorite things, is to take a script that, even Cloverfield was just a treatment when we were in prep, and we didn't get the script until like 2 or 3 weeks before production. But that was a puzzle. We had only $25 million. We had to bring it in under. We were going with complete unknowns in a cast. We had this amazing creature. We knew we had JJ with a brand new deal at Paramount, but hadn't produced a bunch of movies. He was more like known in television at that moment. He was doing Star Trek, rebooting that whole franchise. And Cloverfield was this quiet, under the radar, and everyone said it was unmakeable for $25 million. And it wasn't, and we did it. And so, it's like, that's the fun of producing. Like, not only proving people wrong, but doing it. Doing the work. And
Yeah, that's your superpower.
Yeah, that's the fun. That is the superpower of producing.
And you redefined how those movies could be made, so it's creating a whole new business model, which is really exciting.
Well, it was funny. So we did that at that number, like the blockbuster at 25 million, and then obviously you worked for Jason, and he did that at a much lower budget, where that seemed impossible. That model seemed.
That was a
The
phenomenal.
low budget blockbuster, is really
I mean,
quite a
it
special.
really is a specialty niche thing, but he really figured it out, and I kudos to that, because it seemed impossible. That seemed impossible. That was the thing, and I did a small movie with Blumhouse right when I was leaving Bad Robot, just to see how to do it, just to see, with Catherine Hardwicke, and then you see the pain making a movie at that price tag.
It's hard.
But it was fun getting to know Jessica and working with Catherine and making a movie in 19 days, and it was a big
You guys are
challenge.
crazy.
It's
a whole different art form.
Or what, 2.3
It was.
on that one? That
Yeah.
was a little teeny one.
Oh,
It was
my God.
tiny.
Yeah.
But we had a good time.
But there were a lot of the lessons from Cloverfield that we tried to apply to the model in the same way, in terms of like really calling on experienced department heads and things like that, where you can build the movie in a way, like you were saying, that becomes makeable and where you have the best possible chance of success.
You want it to be somewhat undeniable. If you're going to spend that many millions of dollars, and when you think about it, it's extraordinary, that many millions of dollars. And even if it's just $2 million, I mean, what do you mean just $2 million?
Right.
It's a lot of money, and a lot of money is on the line. So I always take it really seriously.
Yeah.
That I'm managing a lot of money, and you've got to have, the execution has to be excellent.
This brings up a good point, though, in terms of how you pitch and how you hear pitches, because budget means so much, right, in how you view a project. I'd rather have people commit to sort of like a number or a general range than what I hear all the time, which to me proves that you are probably an untested producer and wildly inaccurate. I hear like, oh, it's somewhere between 5 to 10. And it's like, okay,
5 to double.
Oh, it's a low budget between 5 to 10. And I'll be
50
like,
and 100.
well, have you spoken to a line producer? Not everybody can hire a line producer. Not everybody can hire a great line producer. But I do think that when you're kind of approaching with a pitch, especially kind of with something in under 10 too, because the difference between 2 million and 6 million is sometimes greater, I think, than 20 to 30. Like what you can do and what you can get away with in a low budget, as it can be drastically different in those little millions. But to have a really good idea of what you can do, what you can really accomplish it for, and the difference between a net budget and a gross budget too, which actually comes up all the time. And I don't think a lot of producers who are not financiers necessarily understand that distinction.
So explain what you mean by that.
Well, gross budget means just kind of what your total budget would be for the whole film. But the net budget is often, the way I use it mostly, is after you sort of take out what the incentives would be. So to give you an example, there might be a film shot in Canada, and maybe it's a Canadian filmmaker, and you're going to be getting 30% of your budget out of Canada. So technically, if I'm going to be financing the film, I don't necessarily need to spend the full amount. I don't need to pay $8 million for the film. If I'm doing a negative pickup and pre-buying a film, I can buy it for a lower amount because they're going to get that incentive back. So it's, even though it's an $8 million budget, I might be getting the film for $6 million, right? So that's kind of at least how like kind of the pure acquisitions market works.
Did you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive in the curating your pitches for different audiences?
Sure, absolutely. I think, well, look, if you're going direct to a distribution platform, if you're speaking to Amazon or Magnolia or IFC or Warner Brothers, you have a lot of information at your disposal about what's worked and what hasn't. One of the things I've seen time and time again are people that will like pitch a film and then use like a direct competitor's example. You know what I mean? Like right now, like Neon is sort of setting themselves up as like a competitor to A24. So if you're going into Neon, it's probably not the best thing to just compare your film to The Witch. And it's like The Witch meets Spring Breakers might like come off as a little like, you have a lot of feedback. If you know where the employees have worked at Neon and who you're going to be speaking to over there. And you also can look at what Bleecker Street's distributed versus, you know, what Paramount's been doing. And you can, I think it doesn't take that much research, but it's amazing to me that a lot of people don't, because they get very tied into like kind of memorizing what their pitch is when they're speaking to people. But I do think that you can kind of preach to the choir there. When you're speaking to independent financiers or equity, I've noticed that sort of less is more. Again, this is not for everybody. You're talking mostly to an individual that might be either speaking for the money directly or it's their money, right? So it really becomes about personal connection oftentimes too, and really kind of understanding what they require from a creative relationship. And it's going to be more about that than sort of a little more transactional if you're speaking to sort of like a platform or a studio or a distributor, where it's like they know what's kind of working for them and they have the facts. The other thing too is like, don't point to films that are unsuccessful. Yeah. You know, people talk in comparables. I do really love like really intriguing, like deep cut pitches. I love when people are like, oh, it's like, it's Ingrid Goes West meets Suspiria meets, so you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna know, how are we gonna pull this together? That sounds like interesting to me, but it takes place in a submarine. Like, I like when people come up with really creative ideas, but you really have to be careful about those films that you pick, and you have to make sure that you're not, I mean, right now, for instance, not to jump around, everybody's like, it's like Get Out, but in kindergarten. And you're like, okay. Like there's films that are lightning in a bottle too, and you have to be really careful not just to point to the last most successful release within a particular genre. And that's something that's just like a huge pet peeve of mine. It's like, okay, I mean, for years people were still using Little Miss Sunshine, and people still go back to it. Or it's like Napoleon Dynamite. Like, you point to those big Sundance hits. It's Whiplash, but it's in the world of ice skating. Like, I understand people are going with it, but sometimes it's better to sort of, you have to remember that people in acquisitions, and especially people that are deciding to finance films, like, and use their own money for it, are generally really passionate about film and have a breadth of film knowledge. And I think a lot of directors are sometimes afraid to share that, and they should.
Great.
That's also reading the trades. So like if you're pitching to somebody, like
the information's there.
What else have they acquired recently? And IMDb isn't always accurate. There's a lot of old projects on there that may not be relevant any longer. But you know, if the person you're pitching to just had a big announcement that week and you don't know about it, you have to know these things. You have to be up on what is, you know, no competitive development. If you're pitching a thriller and this company just bought another thriller last week and you're not aware of that, you can't tailor your pitch correctly.
Well, and also it's actors too. If you take all the buyers, it's always challenging if you're casting before you go in, because someone could have had a terrible experience with actor X and you don't know that. And maybe it wasn't in the trades, or there's a big scandal with something and you didn't read it, to Jessica's point, and you're like, I have so-and-so attached, and they're like, yeah, we're not working with so-and-so. So it is a little dicey sometimes when you're casting, and that it's hard, when you're making the biggest creative choice with your director to pick an actor to carry the movie, and that, it's on their shoulders, really, sadly. I really feel for actors. Because it really is on their shoulders.
Yeah, no pressure.
It just happened to me with a Vanity EP that we're bringing on to kind of add like street cred to a project. And we thought it was a big coup that we got this really big name that adds a lot of authenticity. And we went back to the studio and said, we got so-and-so. And they're like, yeah, no.
We won't work with them.
Yeah. And so, we learned the lesson and went back and got like kind of a pre-approved, like it needs to be one of these 6 names. And, now we're working from that pre-approved list, but it happens a lot.
Okay, now to take a little detour, do you guys want to speak to AFM and kind of how that market works?
Sadly, yes, I will describe how that market works. Not to diminish the value. I think it's nice to have a film market based in LA. I think it's been a challenge for AFM because they're not associated with kind of a major festival. Yeah. I mean, that's the benefit of Berlin and Cannes is people have to be there for acquisitions purposes, but also all the cast is going to be there. You're going to have a lot of directors, and there's sort of a thriving kind of, it becomes a cultural moment. And AFM doesn't have that. So it's set up as sort of strictly like a conference. It's like any other convention in the world where you buy and sell. The same thing happens for every other creative field. It's like going to a book fair or going to like a car fair. It just happens to be kind of a conference having to do with sort of the buying and selling on the international and domestic front. The challenge, I think, for a lot of independent distributors is there's not a lot of completed films that you haven't seen or are aware of. So it's mostly just kind of pure meetings and seeing what a lot of the sales agents have sort of coming up. And it can be a bit of a relentless slog, to be honest, because it really is, you miss the energy of a festival, but you're getting all of the work of taking meetings. And at the same time, you're trying to parse out the value of projects before maybe they're fully packaged, or maybe there's a promo, or maybe it's just a mood reel, and it becomes the decision making becomes a little harder. And people often will not even really bring their best stuff to AFM, but that said, it's still like on the menu of places that both sales agents and distributors need to go.
What are the best markets right now? You said Cannes.
I think it depends on who you're talking to, but if you're talking to kind of the higher end distribution companies, people that are acquiring content for North America or for the world, it's Toronto almost surpasses all. Toronto and Sundance might kind of go back and forth between their big years. You might see a blip out of Berlin in terms of the domestic market. Still a great place to be. I still love Berlin. Cannes is probably kind of the number 3. So if you have Sundance and Toronto, Cannes probably there. And then, South by Southwest and Tribeca really, it's sort of year by year. I think Tribeca's really kind of come in competitively, and there's been a couple
South
of
by too.
Yeah.
There's good buzz to premiere at South by, and then, sort of get into the marketplace for like the tastemakery kind of people and like a younger audience. I feel like South by's emerged as a place where you want certain genre films to premiere.
I don't think you see it as a big acquisitions market on completed films as much anymore, but you do. I think if you're a young development executive or a CE, South by Southwest is great because you're really catching people like that first feature, that short. And it's also great if you're a distributor premiering a film there. I think that it can
like Quiet Place
absolutely
premiered there, and it just blew the doors off. And even Olivia Wilde's film, Booksmart, got so much good buzz and so many great reviews out of that. Box office wise, I don't think it did necessarily what it needed to do, but it's a low budget movie and it's excellent. So, and it came out of that with like a real pedigree out of that festival.
Disaster Artist was like a big kind of sale and deal out of there, and I don't think it would have played as well elsewhere.
Yeah.
But it can build careers, Short Term 12 maybe didn't perform in kind of the traditional sense, but take a look at those actors and that group of people that, if that had premiered in Sundance, maybe it would have gone under the radar, but it was like the biggest film that year. Tiny Furniture, it's great examples of it.
What about some of the more specific genre festivals like Fantastic Fest and things like that? Are there buyers who are looking at those festivals?
I personally go to Fantastic Fest every year as often as I can because I think, Fantastic's a little bit of an odd duck because it's not just exclusively genre. I mean, they played Son of Saul there. It really is about films that are at the vanguard, really boundary pushing. So I highly recommend it, certainly from like a CE kind of and development perspective. I enjoy it too. It's like kind of a palate cleanser after Toronto, which is so like rigorous. But you don't see a lot of like full acquisitions right out of the festival, which is okay. I think people are pulling away from that too.
I think it's also about finding those filmmakers, those voices. Like for
Absolutely.
me, it's always, going back to what you were saying about festivals and curation, the names that are coming out of those festivals are always ones to pay attention to. Mm-hmm.
But I do a lot of off market. I do Palm Springs Shorts. I'll do Frontiers and Fantasia as often as I can. Fantastic Fest is great. I don't hit personally a lot of like the horror specific festivals only because a lot of those ones have premiered before.
Right.
But I don't know. Do you hit the circuit a lot?
Not the small festivals. I only usually go to the big Toronto and Sundance, and and if there's a reason to be at others, Cannes or Venice or something, then you would go with a film. But yeah, I don't.
Or Tellurides,
Because mostly agents will send me stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have to go.
You don't have to go.
Because they'll say, oh, this movie won blah, blah, blah. Here's a link.
Yeah.
Please watch it and meet my filmmaker. So at this point, after this many years, I'm old. So I get a lot of things in my inbox of like, can you just watch this for me?
Can I watch it at home, please?
I will caveat that when I say that we go to I don't always go to all these anymore in my old years. It really is a young person's game.
Your people.
We send people to go. Yeah.
Well, even if you're at Sundance, you can only see so many movies. There's always going to be the stuff that you're like, I have to be there and see it with everybody else, and the stuff that you're going to wait for the screen.
And you're doing meetings, and if you start negotiating something, see you later. You're out for hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been so informative, you guys. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you. But also, we have a martini shot. So what is, not literal, in the film sense. So what's your kind of your parting advice? If there's a big point I didn't ask you about, or final words?
I mean, for me, in terms of producing and selling, the most important thing is sort of, to your point, passion. If you're a producer and you go into a buyer and you are with a new writer or a new filmmaker, some kind of less established piece of material, it really is about, I'm willing to spend 2 years on this. I'm totally vouching for it and I believe in it. And you have to, because if you don't, it's a waste of time. Right. It really is. You might as well do something. You might as well put that on the shelf and try for something you really care about. And so I don't work on that much at a time, but what I do work on, I really care about.
Great. Peter?
I would say, and we spoke about this earlier, is really find your people. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And that's not to say, I think that a lot of people can feel a little horrified by how Hollywood is, and it can be very sort of chit-chatty and it's all about connections. That said, it's a social business, and filmmaking is a social art form. So if you can't deal with people, it becomes infinitely harder for you. And I think you want to surround yourself with like-minded individuals too. So you're not just, banging out a script and sending it out into the ether, hoping that it happens. It is important to go to festivals and go to events and try to make friends, because not only is it more fun, but it also means that I've noticed people there's generations, right? Mm-hmm. If you're coming up at an agency desk, the people that you end up working with are the other people that are kind of around your age and environment that kind of come up together. And the same thing with producers. You take a look at the people Jason Blum has worked with, and you take or the Divide Conquer guys, right? Take a look at those careers, and it's people sort of sticking together and banding together. It's a small thing, but I think it's super meaningful.
I think it's really true. Jessica?
Do your research. I can't tell you how many times I was at a pitch fest as an assistant and somebody would come in and pitch me a movie, even that had already been released, that they just weren't aware of, or knowing that, yes, of course, DreamWorks has, with Steven Spielberg had done E.T., and yes, they'd done Saving Private Ryan, but don't just pitch things that fit exactly the bill of what they've already done. Know what they're doing now in the moment, and that they're going to want to evolve and not just recreate exactly what they've done before. So it all comes kind of back to knowing what companies are looking for.
Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Catch a Break. We'd like to thank Sherryl Clark and Peter Van Steemburg. Please check out the website at catchabreakpodcast.com and follow us on all the social media. Catch a Break is produced in partnership with Catchlight Films, Rose Colored Pictures, and the Other 50%, and is also sponsored by Crewvie, an online solution for producers to find and promote local crew and production support worldwide. Find them at crewvie.com. That's CREWVIE.com. And thank you to Andrew Jocelyn, who created our theme music, Mantra for a Struggling Artist. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode where we discuss production tax incentives.